Again, thank you for joining us this evening. This workshop is available in both English and Spanish. Our interpreter, Julie Burns from the Communications Bridge, will give instructions on how to join the Spanish language room. Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you. Muy buenas noches y bienvenidos al taller de paisajes resilientes. Tenemos servicios de interpretación aquí en el canal de Zoom. En cuanto termine este anuncio, verá que si hace clic en el círculo con los tres puntitos, va a haber un globo. Haga clic en el globo y de ahí puede seleccionar español. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos. Back to you, Chief Nichols.
Thank you, Julie. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ben Nichols. I'm the Executive Director for Fire Safe Sonoma, here to support our partners in this great work coming forward to share information on creating a resilient landscape around your home. This workshop series, Resilient Landscaping, Gardening in the Defensible Space Zone, is presented in 4 parts. We will focus on what it takes to make a landscape resilient, meaning it is biodiverse, drought resistant, fire-wise, and beautiful. So, the Resilient Landscapes Coalition was formed about 8 years ago when members of these 4 organizations joined together to provide education and resources to help landowners with their defensible space. Our work began on the Bennett Ridge, where 70 of 90 homes burned in the 2017 Nuns Fire. Some of the landowners requested help with landscaping for defensible space, sustainability with habitat in mind, and our workshops were born. Science-based information, the UC Extension provides invaluable updated guidance, which we incorporate. April with CNPS has lots of info on native plants, and the Sonoma Ecology Center about ecology and habitat. We were awarded a grant from Sonoma County Vegetation Management Program to continue our landowner workshops, so we expanded to reach landscape professionals, fire inspectors, and we created outreach materials and developed extensive website to support that information. It has been an honor and extremely valuable to work with the fire agency folks. We vet our content through their lens, the whole time learning a tremendous amount from each other, sharing information back and forth. On our next slide, we have our 4-part series. Tonight is the first part of our 4-part series. So tonight we're talking about the framework sustainability for defensible space and beyond. Our next event will be June 16th, speaking to defensible space zones and code requirements, followed by June 23rd, fire-wise design within the defensible space zone, and finally, Part 4 on June 30th, maintenance in the defensible space zone. Each workshop will be accompanied by myself and the team that we have brought forward to you tonight. Next slide. This is a webinar, so you do not have audio or video activated. This webinar is being recorded. We do love questions and we'll take time at the end, so please only add questions to the Q&A box, not to the chat. This helps us keep track of all questions as they can sometimes get lost in the chat. We have a wonderful panel of Resilient Landscape Coalition members with years of experience in a variety of relevant fields. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Caitlin Cornwall, a senior project manager from the Sonoma Ecology Center.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I have about 25 or 35 minutes of slides to show you, and then we'll convert to Q&A. Okay, let's jump in. This is our website, and pretty much everything that we're going to say in this 4-part series can be found on this website. So we really urge you to check it out, and you can use it as your sort of book and helpful guide to back up what you hear tonight. We are going to focus on the sort of middle 2 panels that you see here. on this screenshot from the website about plants and about the landscape around the home. I'm, as was introduced, I'm with Sonoma Ecology Center, and our mission is to work with our community to lead actions that achieve and sustain ecological health. And we have sort of a home base in Sonoma Valley, but we work across the North Bay. So thank you all for being here this evening. The subtitle of this series is called Gardening in the Defensible Space. And this sort of refers to a great quote from a researcher that we are all big fans of, Douglas Tallamy. I'll refer to him later in the slides as well. Talking about, he has this great quote that says that we should garden as if life depended on it. And he says that because so much of the surface of our planet has been altered and degraded by human activity, that the pieces that are left, such as our yards, have become really important as habitat. And there are species that may not survive without help from our yards. We can actually make a meaningful contribution collectively to the fate of life on the planet by doing well in our yards. So I'm going to be talking this evening about the defensible space, meaning the 100 feet or so around a home. But we wanted to also put this evening's, this series content in the context of the larger landscape, because as you know, people are doing a lot of work beyond the defensible space, and we, in concert with many other partners, have also created a whole information source for that area beyond the defensible space. And so this website here, Tending the Land for Fire Resilience in Sonoma County, is a wonderful resource that we'd also urge you to check out. All right, so let's jump in. A lot of us live in this area or stay in this area despite some of the difficulties of living here because it is so beautiful. There is such a variety, a mosaic of vegetation types or habitats or plant communities, whatever phrase you want to use. We have forests with big trees. We have really shady forests like Douglas fir forest, and we have much more open forests like oak woodlands. We have grasslands that are sunny all year. We have chaparral, which is a shrub or brush dominated plant community that is really unique to very few areas in the world. And we also have specialized plant communities that grow along streams or in wet places. And they're all different. They're all fascinating. They have their own mix of plant and animal species. And it's really a lifetime's work or pleasure to come to understand more deeply the complexity of the landscape wherever you are. And these landscapes, these habitats around us, none of them are pristine. None of them are there just simply by nature itself, because there have been people here for 15, 20,000, who knows how long. And before Europeans got here, there were a lot of people here and they were managing the landscape. They changed it. We would have a lot more Douglas firs around here if there hadn't been a lot of prescribed fire being done by California Native tribes. And then since Europeans have been here, there's been more. There's been timber harvest and farming and plowing and burning, lots of different practices. And some of these practices, well, there's a lot that we have to learn from the indigenous practices that were going on before Europeans got here. And really, the sort of modern mainstream culture has just been waking up to this in the last maybe 20 years, that by stopping the regular intentional burning that indigenous people were doing, we have lost out. We've lost biodiversity, and we've made our landscapes, when they do catch fire, far, far more flammable. We have a couple of generations of buildup of fuel loads, which really generally means very thick vegetation, some of it dead, some of it alive. And it means that when we do have fires, especially if there's any wind, they can be very high in severity and they can be very hard to put out. If you're interested in the past land uses and land management practices in California, I highly recommend a wonderful book called Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson. And it talks about using a really fascinating array of evidence, talks about all the ways that Indigenous Californians manage the land. Okay. So a lot of us in Sonoma County live in what's called the wildland-urban interface. And this means an area where homes and their associated structures are right among or very close to forests or shrubs or grasslands. And there's been trends that affect the flammability of the WUI area. One of these trends is climate change. We have more heat, more wind, more extremes of both drought and precipitation. And so that means that we have more chance of wind-driven fire events, for example. We also have, as I was saying, a long-term trend of fire suppression. So there is a greater buildup of fuels in most parts of the landscape. And then the third trend is that as California has developed, we have more and more people living and working and driving in the WUI. And those are all ignition sources. Fires can be started by any kind of power equipment, by mufflers, by a chain dragging on a road. So anytime you increase human presence, you both increase the number of ignition sources, and then you also increase the number of structures or places or assets that have to be defended by firefighters. So all of this means that we have an increased risk of fire, starting, and then an increased risk of fire causing severe damage. One natural source of wildfire ignition is lightning, but we actually don't get that much lightning around here. So generally speaking, humans are the source of ignition. And so the more people you have, the greater the likelihood of ignition. And this has been true, that humans are the source of ignition in our region for many, many thousands of years, because like I say, we don't have much lightning. And so it's always been a people thing. Another point about wildfire is another reason that it's bad, uncontrolled wildfire, if we want to talk about that, is when structures burn, it is an environmental catastrophe. We have so much plastic and synthetic materials in our homes and in our cars. There is a huge amount of air pollution and water pollution when structures burn. And then there's a huge environmental cost of rebuilding homes also. All the material has to get trucked out, and then new material has to be made and brought in. So for so many reasons, we want to keep the zone around our homes one that can, if a fire approaches, that it will stop or slow down. and that if there's an ember storm, that our yards are not contributing to that. Here is a set of maps that compare two different wildfires in very similar areas. This is really illustrating how human development, mostly homes, but some businesses have expanded into wildland areas, creating a bigger WUI, a bigger wildland urban interface. On the left is the Hanley fire in 1964, and on the right, the Tubbs fire of 2017. So you can see from the pink outline that the wildfire took almost the same path in both years, and that's because it was driven by the same winds. These winds are created by the topography, by the mountains and valleys, and those don't change over time. And so uh, we get uh, the same direction of wildfire travel in wind events over time. It's always the same. This is a shot from Santa Rosa, but in Sonoma Valley, where I live, for example, the fire that happened in 1964 was called Nuns, and the fire that happened in 2017 was called Nuns because they both started and raced down the same canyon, Nuns Canyon. So those things, there are, relatively predictable places where huge wind-driven fires happen, but the difference is that in the map on the right, you can see that there's just a growing coverage of this dark brown area, which shows where more high density housing has just happened over time. So here's another sort of context slide. I'm going to show you a pair of slides. This one is from a time period of about 80 years, and this shows the historical footprint of various wildfires. The more pale the color, the older, the further back in the past the fire happened. So the very dark ones are more recent, and the white ones are um, back in 1935. So generally, these wildfires burned, in the low thousands of acres, but the size started increasing as time goes on. So, for example, the Hanley fire in 1964 was 53,000 acres. And so now the next slide is of the same area, but it is showing a more recent time period. So this is only, the last 10 years. And actually, I thought we had updated this slide. We actually were able to change this 2025 that's on here to 2026 because we didn't have anything big in this geography. Well, so far we haven't had it in the last year. So you can just see that in 10 years, more of the landscape was affected by a wildfire than in the preceding 80 years. So not all wildfire is bad. High severity wildfire is really what we're attempting to, hang on one second, I have to close my door. He's here to do that. Sorry. I thought I was alone in my office. Okay, so this is a huge area of land, as you see, that have been affected by wildfire in the last 10 years. Most of this acreage probably experienced low or mid intensity wildfire. And that kind of intensity is a very natural, longstanding part of California's ecological history and can maintain very healthy ecosystems. What we're really worried about is high severity wildfire. Usually that means it's being driven by by wind. And that is where we start getting extremely high levels of damage, high trauma, people dying, homes burning, and really severely affected wildland areas. This is a map that you can look up, and I would encourage you to inspect it to see what the conditions are like where you live or where you're concerned about, the place that brings you to this series. Um, this is a map that was modified by Sonoma County from data from CAL FIRE, and it shows the different fire hazard severity zones that CAL FIRE has designated. And in the legend, you can see there's sort of two different color schemes. One is the LRA, and that stands for the local area that is, and that means that the entities that respond to wildfires in the LRA are the local fire districts. So, for example, in my part of the world, that's Sonoma Valley Fire District, and we have a number of them across Sonoma County. And the SRA is the more rural areas. And when wildfires happen there, it's CAL FIRE who leads the response. All the fire agencies have agreements among each other to come to each other's aid as needed to respond to an event. One real reason to look up your location using this map is that new regulations are coming down the pike that will govern the condition that is allowable around your house or any structures on your property. And the new regulations are more and more strict as you get into the higher severity zones. Um, the new regulations also are going to take effect immediately for new construction, but they will be phased in over time for existing construction. And if you want to know a lot more about those regulations and just the general best practices for meeting the legal requirements, come back next week for the next presentation in this series. All right, so now I get into the fun stuff. The part of this four-part series that I'm really emphasizing because I'm here from Sonoma Ecology Center is the question about how you create defensible space, that does what defensible space needs it to do, that keeps your home safer, but is also beautiful, sustainable, and biodiverse, that uses less water, that invites birds, butterflies, lizards, all kinds of local wildlife in so that they can make a living, which they need to do. And that you're actually making a positive contribution to your quality of life and the planet as a whole. And this slide is just an example, great example of a defensible space design that meets all of the ordinances, provides a lot of habitat. It has an oak canopy with native plants under it. It's providing shelter and nectar for insects and birds and other wildlife. And it's a great example. So we're going to be talking about creating and tending landscapes that produce multiple benefits. Fire safety, yes, and also benefits in terms of beauty, water, soil, and wildlife. We're not trying to make your yards never experience wildfire. Probably at some point, your neighborhood will experience wildfire. And the good news is that native plants here have been growing in the presence of occasional fire for eons, and they're pretty good at it. They're pretty good at it. They have recovery mechanisms, and it can be really helpful if you ever have access to an area that burned. It can be really helpful to go there, especially in the spring after the wildfire, and just see with your own eyes and touch with your own hands the way the plants come back from wildfire. They know how to do it, and it kind of metaphorically is very helpful in dealing with the trauma and fear that wildfire can produce in us humans. You're going to hear in this series a huge number of suggestions and sometimes requirements. We wanted to make this slide to convey that you have to decide how aggressively or enthusiastically you follow all of these suggestions and requirements. You have to go through your own risk assessment. And the tools you can use to think about your level of risk is which fire hazard severity zone you're in, what your budget is, whether you're facing risks that are caused by uh, landowners around you, or whether you yourself, your property that you're thinking about, may be causing risks to other people around you. You can make a plan over time, decide what's most important or affordable or has the best bang for the buck to do sooner versus later. There is some wiggle room in the law. Um, so that's good to know. You can make arguments um, about your particular spot. And then another point to know is that even though there are these legal requirements and best practices, in the end, what you actually do may be dictated above all by your insurance company. Your insurance carrier may have requirements and they may trump everything else. And there have been people who try to switch insurance carriers just because of this issue. But I will tell you, I've been personally going through this. I just got non-renewed for my home insurance and had to get a different carrier. Uh, the the criteria and tools, decision-making tools that the insurance companies are using are changing a lot. They're getting more sophisticated. That can be good, that can be bad. So how things are right now with your insurance carrier might not be true in 6 months. There's a lot of flux in the insurance world. So at bottom, the important thing is to think about your goals, what level of risk you're comfortable with. For some people, it's like their mom's lilac bush that's under the dining room window. They're not going to move it. They're not going to move it, even though it's right in that zone zero and they're supposed to cut it down. They're willing to take that risk. Those are the kinds of trade-offs that you can think about and articulate, especially if you're working with a contractor or anything. You need to be really clear um, what your priorities are. And you're going to need to talk to your neighbors. If you live in a neighborhood, you're going to need to talk to your neighbors. Or if you live on a road that goes through thick vegetation before it gets to your house, you're going to need to work with your neighbors because all the conditions all around you affect the level of risk on your property. And I keep saying your property, but these things apply even for people who don't own property. If you volunteer at a preserve, or if you have a place of work, or if you rent, these are all still important things to know. So, in thinking about the defensible space zone, we actually have a great opportunity to think through the lens of how to design a garden so that it can play a role in restoring the ecological system and encouraging sustainability. And these considerations are by no means in conflict with following the regulations about defensible space. And that's why this partnership, this Resilient Landscapes Coalition exists, is to bring together these different priorities and provide you a set of recommendations that can check all of these boxes. So one of the important things that you can accomplish in a landscape around a home is healing some of the habitat fragmentation that humans have been putting on the planet for quite a while. A lot of our wildlands are separated from each other as people and pavement have moved into habitat areas. Um, and we've done so much of this now that it's not enough for the wild areas to be where wildlife is. Our yards can also be where wildlife is. Our home gardens can provide critical habitat. As our friend Douglas Tallamy says, for the first time in history, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. Moving on. These are just some of the ecosystem services that a well-designed and well-maintained yard can provide. So biodiversity, I'm going to talk on the next slide a little bit more about what biodiversity means. I guess I will say here, biodiversity means the abundance and variety of forms of life, all forms of life, from fungi in the soil to golden eagles in the sky, everything in between, plants, animals, microbes. Biodiversity is crashing around the planet, and it is intensely satisfying to see the benefits to biodiversity in your own yard. When you have birds and insects and lizards using your yard that didn't used to be able to for some essential part of their life cycle, it's very satisfying and it feels like you're making a contribution. We can also build soil, and there's a bunch of reasons for doing this. I'll talk about them in a future slide. Water, super important. This is a awesome mantra that we like about water. We want to slow it, sink it, spread it, and store it. And if your yard has less hardscape and has low places, you can help water that falls from the sky get into the soil and stay there. And that is so important for all the plants and animals that live there. And it's also really important that that water is then not overwhelming our systems, like our pipeline systems, our stormwater systems, is not causing erosion because it's sinking into the ground and being held there. It's a really important thing. Our gardens can also sequester carbon. We're in a climate crisis, and soil and plants are the best places to put carbon into, to bring down carbon from the atmosphere and put it on the earth. That is what plants do. That is how they operate. And so satisfying to see that happen in our own yards. And then pollinators and all the other insects that support the web of life. Our yards are just great places to do good work in that department. So here's another slide about biodiversity. A lot of people are familiar with the crash happening with monarch butterflies. In some of our recent years, there have been only 3% of the number of monarchs that used to migrate through the US in 1980. So and that's just sort of an example of the massive decline in insect populations around the globe. And why does that matter? It matters because insects really are the foundation of all the food webs, all the birds. Most birds eat insects most of the time. Insects also are what break dead things down into new building blocks for new forms of life. And all of the causes of insect decline we collectively can address by the way we design our yards. Things like habitat fragmentation, use of pesticides, kind of monocrop landscaping like lawns, invasive plants and animals that take up habitat space, and then also light pollution is another problem for insects. So all of these problems we can help reverse in our yards. And again, you're going to hear more detail about all of this in the coming parts of the series and also on the website. So don't feel like you have to try to get all the details right now. So the most important ways that we have found in the Resilient Landscapes Coalition to accomplish all of these objectives, if you're trying to accomplish safety and water and carbon and wildlife and beauty and low maintenance, the easiest solution is to mostly use native plants. And there are so many reasons for this. And you don't have to use 100% of native plants, but if you use mostly native plants, you are by definition supporting the local food web. That's what all of the animals around here evolved with. There are lots of resources for information for how to do this, and there are more and more great resources all the time. Planting in islands is a really essential design strategy that you will hear more about. You can make dense patches of plantings that support birds and butterflies and insects, and then you can have gaps, as you can see in this picture, between those islands of vegetation that will, if there are flames or embers coming toward your house, provide a gap, a discontinuity in fuel. And that's kind of the essential design point of defensible space. And you'll hear more about this when April gives her presentation. It is important to provide a water source, especially like starting at this time of year. This is a perfect time of year that we're giving this series because, as you know, we have red flag warnings tomorrow and the next day. It's the first of the season. So it's time to really be thinking about this. I just did a bunch of work at my house over the weekend, for example. One super important thing about biodiversity, a lot of us have gotten the message that it is a good thing to support pollinators. And that is, of course, true. But there's another way of thinking about the insect life that we want to support with our plantings, which is just simply food. Food, for example, virtually all birds feed their babies caterpillars. Even if they grow up to be seed eaters, like goldfinches, when those goldfinches are babies, what they eat is caterpillars. And so we're learning it's really important to plant plants that are good for caterpillars. And what plants are there? Luckily, oh, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Here, this is my slide on caterpillars. This is great data, again, from Douglas Tallamy. Across the bottom, you can see different species of trees. These are actually genuses of trees. And the columns show you how many different species of caterpillars these different kinds of plants support. So you can see oaks are the champion, which is great. We have lots of oaks around here. So there are all different sizes of oaks. So plant an oak or don't pull up all your oaks. Hollyleaf cherry is another native plant, small tree that we have. It's deciduous. It's obviously another great one to plant. So anyway, you'll see all these slides after the presentations. And it's a very good feeling to be planting species that you know will help the food web. Let me go back if I can. I am not able to go back. There we go. Oh dear. Okay, I'm not able to go back.
I think you have your laser pointer on.
Let's see. Is it off now? Oh no, that's on.
Oh, no, there it goes. Now you just sorry. There you go. Try again on your slide back.
I just want to make a special point about oak trees. They are so beautiful to look at. And they are the kind of pinnacle plant species around here. They support so much life. So if you have room for a big oak, like a valley oak, that's fantastic. But there are many other sizes of them. And you can integrate them into all kinds of designs that you will hear more about from April when she gives her presentation. A lot of people get kind of confused about mulch because different kinds of mulch can be flammable. But on the other hand, your plants need mulch, especially to do well through these hot, dry summers. We we want to hold that soil in place, and we want to help the soil hold water. So planting vegetation on slopes helps hold that soil in place, and mulching vegetation means that you won't have as much runoff, you won't have to water your plants as much, and the mulch suppresses invasive weeds. And you'll hear more in the design webinar about how mulch is great. You can use it in most places. You just want to have separation between your mulched areas so that, again, there's a discontinuity between fuels. So these are some slides that you really never want to see. On the left is an invasion of a super common weed around here. It's one of the broom species. We have French broom and Scotch broom and Spanish broom in Sonoma County. They really are a problem. Most people don't have a ton of it in their defensible space, but some people do. And it can become very flammable, and it tends to come back pretty well after wildfire, unfortunately. So it can take some dedicated work to get rid of it. And we do want to get rid of it because it is flammable and it takes over space from other native plants, and doesn't support the food web. But you don't want to create a totally cleared bare zone like you can see on the right. This is someone who's gone too far. The soil has no vegetation on it. That means it's really vulnerable to erosion. There's also no habitat being provided there, and it's just asking for sun-loving, invasive, flammable plant species to infest that area. And, these shots are not from someone's defensible space, but I think this is just a super important principle to keep in mind. You don't want to open up the soil to too much sun by clearing. More clearing is not necessarily better. If you open up areas to sun, you will get often weeds that will become flammable by June, and then you've got more maintenance on your hands. So doing this kind of work out beyond the defensible space and within defensible space is the kind of work that, for example, the Ecology Center does on the ground, and other entities do too. And you can get consults on strategy for these areas. And again, I recommend the website called Tending the Land, tendingland.org, that I mentioned earlier. Okay, here's a slide about how your garden, your yard, can help with the climate crisis. And the way it does that is by bringing carbon down from the atmosphere and putting it into plants and soil. And generally speaking, soil for a given area of land, the soil can sequester more carbon than the vegetation can, if the plants are healthy. It's those roots, it's the interaction of the plant roots and the soil that build the carbon content, the organic material content of the soil. So keeping soil in place and healthy is a key thing. And, some of us learned this cycle in school, but it is a cycle. The carbon dioxide comes from the air, goes into the plants, goes into the soil. When the plants die, if they decompose, then most of their carbon goes back up into the atmosphere. And that's why long-lived and massive plants like trees are great for binding carbon. The safest, longest lasting storage of carbon is in the soil. So it's really actually quite essential for global climate change that we get as much carbon as possible into the ground. The timing of your work on vegetation, if you're managing existing vegetation and cutting things, it's important to think about the timing of that work in relation to, especially in relation to bird nesting, can also be important in terms of planting plants. The best time to plant new native plants is in the fall when they won't have to survive a hot, dry summer as little young fragile plants with a small root system. You can see on the slide the timing for most bird species when they nest. So if you have to remove a lot from trees, the best time to do that is in the fall through the winter and not in the spring and summer. If you do have to do work during nesting season, you can just visually check the vegetation, the shrubs, the trees before you cut. And of course, there are birds that nest on the ground. So check the ground too. So this slide's returning to a point I've kind of already made. You don't want to go too far. There is no need to create a moonscape. First of all, it's just not what anybody wants to live in, and it doesn't accomplish these other objectives that we've talked about. That again, as I've said, are so satisfying sort of as a resident to be able to see the fruits of your labor and see other animals enjoying your yard and to reduce your water use, etc. So on the left, you can see going too far in the overclearing direction, and on the right, you can see going too far in the neglect direction. Sometimes people can just get sort of paralyzed with not knowing what to do, and hopefully this guidance that we're providing in this series helps you get a sense of what can be your top priorities, which plants to prioritize keeping and which ones can go and what can go in their place. A really basic tenet of ecological gardening or just landscape restoration is to create a lot of different types of spaces. So there's a cool space on the ground. There's a sunny space up on the south side of this tree. There's a little wet spot over there. There's a rocky spot over there. There's a place with really fine soil over there. That kind of diversity of habitats, even though they're microhabitats, is really important for the diversity of plants and animals that can thrive in your yard. So think about that. You don't want to make your site too uniform. So again, the nexus point of all of our recommendations is that you can have a yard that meets the fire safety regulations and really is effective at reducing the risk of wildfire reaching your home, but that also is beautiful, is sustainable, and is biodiverse. And I think I just have one more slide. Yeah, which is the California quail. This is one of the species that you can invite into your yard, and note that it is a ground nester, so it's going to need cover near the ground. And so you don't need to get rid of every single shrub on your property. You want some shrubs in your defensible space because that's one of the many, many habitat niches that our local wildlife can take advantage of and that you can then enjoy. So that is the end of our prepared presentation this evening, and now we're going to transition to questions and answers.
Great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So much great information in your presentation. Really appreciate that. We've got a little less than 10 minutes left for some Q&A. If you have any questions you'd like to pose to the panel, please feel free to add those to the chat. I'm sorry, to the Q&A box, not to the chat. And I just want to introduce myself. My name is Mimi Enright. I'm the program coordinator for the UC Master Gardener program here in Sonoma County, and along with Habitat Corridor Project and Sonoma Ecology Center, one of the founding members of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. So we've got quite a few questions that are relating to interface with neighbors or relationship with a landlord. But I want to start off, and Ben, I hope you're available because I think some of them we're going to need to point your way. from your experience as a firefighter and also with the work that you've been doing in community at Fire Safe Sonoma. So we'll start off with our first question from Jean, where she's asking about the use of the installation of roofline sprinklers as part of a home hardening tool. And either Ben or Eric, I don't know if either of you have any experience with that. I know there's some issues, concerns with possible water supply during a fire event that could make that ineffective. But Ben, any thoughts or perspectives on use of roofline sprinklers?
I, based on my training and experience, am not a big proponent of rooftop sprinklers. Um, it's not an always or never, but the thing that you have to keep in mind is that if you're on a municipal water source, if everyone's doing that, then that drains the water from the system that's available to firefighters to apply directly to the fire. As well as in the event of trying to pre-treat in front of a nuns or tubs type fire when the winds are blowing the way they're blowing, that water is cast away from the house and is downwind of what you're trying to protect by the time it actually, if it hits the ground, because a lot of times with the relative humidities as low as they are, that water is evaporating before it can make contact with what you're trying to protect. And then even if you're not on a municipal water supply and you're on a private water supply, that water source may become even more finite. So you may drain the available water for your property that firefighters would have used to protect your home and your surrounding area because you expended that water before the fire engine arrived. So it's not an always or never. There's definitely scenarios where people have shown that they've saved homes, but as a rule, that water is best used by the firefighters to extinguish the fire.
Yeah, really great insights on that topic, Ben. Thank you for that.
Yeah, could I add a little bit there?
Oh, sure, of course, Eric, please.
Yeah, so something also to note is people think of that as kind of this last minute savior, but a lot of times when it comes to hydration and keeping water around, you actually want to have things hydrated for weeks in advance. Like when it's deep dry season, like plants aren't going to be rehydrated over a day. So when you're thinking, I know that's for the home, but generally people also think the same for plants. So when we're thinking about hydration, we want to think longer term over many days or weeks. And this idea of like sprinklers and like Ben said, there might not be water supply, especially in during fires. During the LA fires, if you're on municipal supply, a lot of times what happened was a home would burn and all of a sudden there's a hole in the line, so the water is not going to more distal homes. It's seeping out wherever the home that burned was. So there's not only diminished amount of water, but there's actually no water at all. So those are completely ineffective. So they can be a last second save, especially if you're on your own water supply, but it's a really low percentage chance that they're actually going to help you compared to a lot of the other kind of topics and points that have been brought up and will be brought up in this four-part series.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
So next question, Valerie is asking about um, how to help with working with neighbors with high hazard conditions, where a neighbor is not maintaining their property with either abandoned structures or overgrowth for years and fallen dead trees with lots of polite requests and pleas to no avail. And that's a very scary situation to be in. And again, Ben, I think I'm going to turn to you and see if you have any insights. I know certainly with the community level work that Fire Safe Sonoma, that there's maybe some opportunities there. So wondering if you have any insights for Valerie on that question.
Just to confirm the concern about what the neighbor is not doing on their side of the fence.
That's correct.
So there is validity in that depending on how close together the homes are. I'm in Larkfield, and so what my neighbor does or doesn't do directly impacts my house in the event that their house catches fire. But that's not across the board. So in more rural areas or where you have better separation between homes, the most important thing to focus on is hardening your home and making sure that your 0 to 5 is as strong as it can be. We all have work to do. I have more work to do than I would like to admit in that 0 to 5 because we just accumulate things around that house. And so as we go into the new regulations, there's going to be a lot of plants that need to come out of that zone and things that we can do on our property before we worry about what our neighbor is doing.
Great answer, Ben. So our mantra is start at your home, do your home hardening, work out into your defensible space from your home into your zone 0, then your zone 1 and 2. And yeah, it is scary. I have a neighbor next door who's driving me crazy who hasn't done the mowing either and has a dead tree, and it's in my 5 to 30 foot zone. So it's a common problem. But yeah, it definitely has me focusing on my zone 0. So I wanted to highlight that next Tuesday for our part 2 of this 4-part series, I'll be presenting on defensible space and on the new Zone 0 legislation that Ben made reference to. So come on back next Tuesday if you want to do a deep dive onto that topic. So I think we've just got time for maybe one more question. There's an attendee who's asking about, as renters, what options do we have to get a property manager or property owner to take care of hazardous conditions, such as abandoned structures or fallen dead oaks? And does anybody have any insights on what requirements are for property owners for renters in terms of maintaining the property?
I think just to tie back into the last question about neighbor concerns, same idea with the landlord comes to be is that communication, right? Just trying to maintain an open line of communication, expressing concerns, and whether or not that's the landowner, the renter, the rentor, or your neighbor. If it's not something that they're going to tackle, you maybe open up the conversation that, I'm willing to do something to address the concern if you give me permission to do it, right? Because the renter needs permission from the landlord as well as an adjoining neighbor if they were to cut the grass on their side of the fence or something along those lines.
I think if the situation is really egregious, it might also be possible for the renter to ask the local fire department to talk to the manager. That's a possibility if the fire department really sees it as a really high risk that matters to the community.
Yeah. So we're actually at time. So sorry we didn't have enough time to go to get to all of your questions. I will say it's a great opportunity for you to come back to one of our follow-on sessions. We have 3 more this month. Many of the questions I see in the Q&A will either be addressed in the defensible space presentation or in our maintenance presentation or in our design presentation. So hopefully we'll see you all back for future events. These will all be recorded and we will be sharing those as resources. And we can also try to grab questions we didn't get to and perhaps try to address those as a group and get that information out to all of you as well. But we want to really thank you all for joining us tonight for the first in this 4-part series this year, and grateful you're all here gaining knowledge to help us all be better prepared for future events. So thanks everybody, and we'll hopefully see you next week. And thanks Caitlin for a great job.
Thank you all.